Good evening. I'm Joe Rastusha, and with the LIFT team, we thank you for joining us for continuation of our conversation on moving towards equitable, trauma-sensitive, and anti-racist practice. Our technical expert, Nadej, thank you, Nadej, has created a brief video to capture some of the discourse from our last convening. And we present it to remind us, if you will, set the tone for tonight's conversation or continuation of that conversation. As in our last meeting, I asked participants to please post your questions in the chat when and as you have them. So let's view some highlights from our last discussion. Nadej, thank you.
I think that students are traumatized and re-traumatized each day by us not acknowledging that their trauma exists and prioritizing things other than experiences that they may have had, as to what Marco spoke about, different things that may have happened. And sometimes those things go unacknowledged for the greater good of everyone else.
Language is so powerful. And I have found that as a building administrator and as a central office administrator, it's always interesting to me to hear how teachers identify behaviors that are happening. And it's always interesting how students of color are described in the actions that they do versus their white counterparts.
Best place to find opportunities is in the mirror. Everything that are most troubled or traumatized or even anxious students, it's all about what they see in us. It's all about what they see us doing. It's all about our facial reactions. It's all about when we choose to pause and when we don't. It's all about when we know how to prioritize language or how to prioritize what might be behind the language. So I really believe that that the most important thing for us to do is to really get to know who we are as people in front of students.
I'm going to ask the question, to me, where are the opportunities to ignite the time and place to support the students? So yes. How are we igniting those things? Because I feel like they're everywhere.
The glaring opportunities to support students kind of live in our bodies and in our physical reactions to trauma. I think so many times we think about the environmental impact of trauma and the systems. I think anytime an educator or school leader, whoever, right, a student support person feels fear, right? If you are in an elementary school and you are fearful of children, that's an opportunity to check your bias and reframe your work with students, right? The classroom is supposed to be a community for students, and far too often it's not seen as that for all students. I think those are the real meaty opportunities to rethink trauma and student achievement in school, in addition to everything else my colleagues have said.
There's a gravitational impulse to deal with the things that we think might be most traumatizing to our students that in some ways might be reflective of what has already been most traumatizing to us.
I would ask, how does the silence and the lack of acknowledgement of these issues impacting our students and our teachers and administrators of color that are doing this work every day and having to fight against systems that don't even see it worth mentioning or valuing or holding space for these issues that are happening time and time again.
Right. In some ways, that silence almost could be interpreted as this is standard operating procedure, that there's nothing unusual here, which is a very disturbing message. Nadej, thank you so much for that video. I think it really helps us and brings us back to that wonderful discussion that we had several weeks ago. And I would like to begin by asking each of our speakers, now live, I might say, to reflect on that conversation we had back in January and maybe share one or two of their takeaways from that conversation. Tia, could you lead us off?
Absolutely. I think one of my biggest takeaways from sitting with my colleagues here and thinking about the conversation later was that things have to really be student oriented or child focused. And if we lose the direction of who we're there to support or who we're there to help, things can go a little haywire. And so even watching the slideshow, the video, you can hear the passion in our tone in terms of being an ally and resource for students, knowing where the work lies and where it should belong.
Jennifer?
Hi, thank you so much for having us again. So for me, I think the first thing that comes to mind is sense of belonging, and what students traditionally get to feel a sense of belonging in schools, and which students do not. And so for me, I took the charge and the commitment and the promise to myself to really kind of lead with that work, and to ensure that within my role as a district administrator, being at the forefront of policies around intentionality in creating a sense of belonging for all students.
Thank you. Marco?
Hi, and thanks for having me again. I guess one thing I took away was that I really found myself emphasizing something that I think a lot of teachers really struggle with, which is learning how to have that ongoing conversation with themselves. And since then, there have been a couple of incidents that have gone on here at my school that have really created opportunities for teachers to really start having an ongoing dialogue with themselves. And they tell me that it's surprising the things that they end up thinking about deeply in connection to their teaching that they normally thought was just part of their personal life. So I guess it's the intersection between person and teacher is something I'm always thinking about.
So as you each talk, I hear this passion around relationships and connection and supporting our students, and really the importance of that sense of belonging. So let me ask a question, and I have a couple questions that we weren't able to get to in our last conversation, and I wanted to bring them back and really use it to start us this evening. The first question, how do you see the overlap of trauma-sensitive, equity-focused, and anti-racist practice in schools? And are there any particular distinctions between these concepts? Marco, could you lead us off on that?
The question almost kind of starts in an opposite place from where it ends, because it starts off asking about overlaps and then it asks about distinctions. I think the overlap is constant, and I don't think about things, I don't envision trauma sensitive, equity and anti-racist kind of overlapping like this. I kind of envision them in a dryer, because it's just constantly whirling around, and you can imagine, 3 different colored garments in the dryer. They're all drying at the same time. They're all going to end up dry at the same time, but they're always different. And so I think the overlap sometimes comes at you quickly. You have something going on, something happens with a student or something happens with a colleague, and they might initially think that the issue is something about racism, when in reality, if you can kind of tweeze it apart, you can see that there's actually more layers to it. So I guess that's where the distinctions come in. I think the distinctions, I don't think it's set distinctions. I think the distinctions can vary from situation to situation, but I also think the distinctions become more clear and therefore more useful the more slowly we look at them and the more patiently we tweeze these things apart. That's why if you're in a situation where you know that trauma, inequity, and racism overlap, deciding things quickly, discipline quickly, or response quickly, or anger quickly, it really confuses the issue and makes it worse.
So by the way, I love your analogy of the dryer. It just like all is kind of mixing together.
And hot.
And hot. And, you talk about this, taking the time, like just like taking that moment to reflect. And I don't mean to put you on the spot, but what are the ways that you do that in your practice? Because it sounded like that is sort of a core element of your work, that reflection, that pause.
I guess I'm always mindful of all the things in a given situation that I don't yet know. So whenever students come and tell me, like, oh, well, mad teacher did this, and, mad racist teacher did that, and blah, blah, blah. I always tell myself that, even if every word that the child just told me is true, I've still only heard half the story. So being careful not to get caught up, kind of swept away, especially if you're approached as someone who might offer support. I think sometimes people kind of get carried away with this crusading sense of wanting to get in there and make something better right away. When, again, if you ask some questions and you're careful to say to people who are involved, I'm not passing judgment by asking questions. I just really need to know what's going on here. And maybe we all need to know what's going on here. We've had one of my students, a ninth grade student, who really legitimately felt that he was always being the first one singled out for discipline when disrupting a class, finally got to a point where he could actually talk to his teacher face to face in the counselor's office and say, I know I make trouble, but a lot of kids make trouble, and you always call me first. Do you have a reason for that? And the teacher was able to say, I don't know that I do, which means I shouldn't do it anymore.
So thank you for sharing that, and just that sort of check your assumptions, and that, we just talked in the first question about how much we care and the passion we have for our students. And I think that could feed that, that overprotective sense without getting the entire story. Yep. Tia, let me remind you the question, okay?
I see it right
oh, you
here.
see it? Okay, fine. Thank you.
So I wish that I had an experience like Marco right now, in terms of him being able to see it in that dryer. I don't see it in a revolver like that. And sometimes it throws me, it takes me aback, because as we all know, sometimes the words trauma sensitive, space, equity, space, anti-racism, space, diversity, space, they can be buzzwords. Mm-hmm. And as long as, what I'm finding in a lot of spaces that I serve in, a lot of times, if you know the meanings of those words, you feel like you can say, I practice those in my day-to-day interactions with students, families, and staff. And that's not actually true. So I think part of my work is I'm for student advocacy. I prefer to let my students know what those things mean. So when they feel like they're not getting those things, they can say it. So I like to change the positionality for my students in terms of those words, so that they can understand, if you have this particular feeling, what are the SEL strategies that we can use? So I want them to be able to name those things. Or I'll say, what are microaggressions? Tell me what that feels like if somebody gave you a microaggression. What is it like? Do you know what an anti-racist person is? Do you know what a racist person is? And I think on the lens of positionality and power in a lot of school settings, teachers, staff, they lead the charge of these things. When honestly, I truly believe in my heart, it's the students that should lead the charge, and they need to be able to call things out as they see them and be able to assess them themselves to take away the harm from it. Because if they're not able to unpack that, harm continues to build and build and build. And so throughout my experience, when I started realizing the capitalization on those words in this topic, or EDIJ topics, diversity, equity, and inclusion topics, I just felt it was more important to teach the people that need it the most, which is my little babies, how they can address it and how they can take ownership of it, because I do not see it as fluid. Sometimes we create trauma sensitive spaces. Sometimes they're equitable. Sometimes they're not. Sometimes someone may say an anti-racist comment, but fall back on assume positive intentions, so there's just a lot of things. And I think I pray for a day when, and I think it will come. That's why the LIST program is here. The students that are in this program, that's what they're learning to do. They're moving it past buzzwords and into proactive measures of supporting learning communities. So I'm hopeful that I will one day be able to see these words move into actions more fluidly.
Well, that's, thank you for sharing that. I'm pretty excited about that concept of, you put it in that context of sort of the SEL mindset of that awareness of how I'm feeling, and then giving them the words and understanding and making those connections so that our kids, I'm going to take a breath. So, how does that work with the students get it, they understand it, could you talk a little more about that?
Absolutely. Students sometimes don't get it, but it's important that they're able to, even if they can recognize it a little tiny bit. I think you don't want to use the word trauma to a child and say, oh, you are traumatized. You never want to say that. But you do want to heighten their awareness of if there's situations where they may need additional support, they may need an ally, they may need their mentor, they may need their teacher, their principal, where they need someone, and what that feels like to be inside of those spaces where you're calling out for help and needing it. So I think those things are important. And I think the level of the student, the age bracket of the student, the of the student, I think that's how you can navigate how you share and the words that you use with the student for their understanding. And what I found is that it's actually helpful because they end up teaching their teachers how to treat them. And I think that's like a beautiful thing. I remember when I started with the LIST program, and as a Lesley alum, I was saying, wow, the concepts that we're going over now as people that are teaching these classes, I didn't have that opportunity to learn that. So imagine how many teachers or educators didn't have the opportunity to learn this that have been teaching for, 20, 30 years. It's a new thing. Of course, like I said, assume positivity and everything, but they may not know it. So the kids can know it right now. They are here and now. Okay, fresh sponge minds. They can know it right now. So I think that will just help to create a more positive change.
Thank you, Tia.
Joe,
Jennifer.
can I just say something really, really quick in response? Jen,
Absolutely.
I'm so sorry. This is just one. First of all, Tia, of course, everything you said really resonates, especially about not talking about trauma But one thing that really stood out as I was listening to you is that it is great work to get the students to feel like they can actually teach the teachers, but along the way, we need to cultivate a culture of openness and courage so that teachers are willing to let themselves be taught. Sometimes by kids who are not actually experienced teachers, they just really know what they need and what they believe. I've been called a whole lot of names by my students because they were upset, but they were actually teaching me something while they were upset. So part of it, and again, that's again why teachers sometimes need to say, realize like this is an attitude I'm catching right now. This is actually informative. This is actually, cathartic for the student or whatever. Sorry to go out of turn. Thank you.
No, I'm just trying to provide a loose structure. Please, if you have something to say, please speak up. Jennifer, love to hear from you.
So what I think of when I hear this question is intersectionality. And I see the question as an opportunity to rethink schools. Currently, I think we all agree that with COVID and all of the things that have been happening since, I'd say, the last 5 to 7 years, um, I don't know that school, as we've always known it, has shifted much throughout history. And so I think the question really is getting at, how do we capture and create a sense of belonging for students that are coming in through these various entry points, right? How do we create safe and supportive learning environments for them? And I think the answer to that question really is to rethink how we've done school so far. I think about my work currently in my district and how, because of the varying backgrounds of the students that we are receiving, teachers are finding themselves kind of stuck, like almost like they're becoming first year teachers all over again. And it's not because they don't know what to do. They are struggling with how to reach this different non-US born demographic that we are welcoming into our schools. And so it's an opportunity, I feel, to really rethink how we're doing school, and how we're framing instruction, how we're framing responding to behavior, how we are reframing what it means to be part of the school community, right? Are we having students feeling like they need to fit into what's already been established, or is everyone's story welcome? And I think that's definitely, as Tia said, a work in progress, but I am hopeful that that can happen. I just think that we need people on the front lines that are willing to call out what needs to change about the way that we're doing school for the better, of students that are coming in and students in the next 5 to 10 years that are going to be entering schools, because it can't be done the way it's been done so far.
No, and I thank you. Those are wonderful comments, Jennifer. I mean, if you think one of the core elements of a safe and supportive trauma-sensitive school is that each and every student has a true sense of belonging to that community, that this is their community, this is their school. The import of what you're saying is significant. It's tremendous. Thank you. So let me go to the second question. And we're going to take a little shift now, and wondering about your thoughts and on the importance of connecting with parents and other community-based organizations and the role that plays in trauma-sensitive schools. And I don't know who wants to start. Like Jennifer, you haven't started yet. Would you like to lead that off?
Sure. I think
Thanks.
Obviously it is important to connect with families and to keep maintain strong relationships. I think it goes deeper than that, though. I think it's about really understanding what the students' needs are based on their context, where they're coming from. I think about a program that we our gifted program in my district, right? So we're thinking about, the procedures and like, what is a student who's eligible for these services look like, sound like? How do we know when a student is eligible? And one of the things that keeps coming up is the ability to think critically. So critical thinking, right? The ability to ask questions, collaborate, really kind of push boundaries. And I had to kind of call that out and say, let's take a moment and really think about that for a minute. A lot of the students that we are receiving and welcoming into our district are coming from backgrounds and cultures where questioning adults or authority or anything that's being put in front of you as far as schooling or task is disrespectful. And so we have to really, I mean, just a whole overhaul of how we're doing things, right? Like even things so that are so near and dear to us as Americans, right? Like, oh, of course we want children who can be curious and who can, but it's like, I grew up in a Haitian household. My family, my parents were immigrants, right? Haitian immigrants. You're going to question what they told you to do? Absolutely not, right? But I had to kind of grow into learning how to navigate. Okay, at home, I can't really question what mom is saying. Just do, but then in school, I got to show that I understand, even that nuance of the code switching and Du Bois calls it the double consciousness, right? Like how to sit in a seat and take on a role in one setting and then be able to switch and take on a different role in another context. And so even though those nuances of identity and incorporating that and kind of building the system to accommodate and meet the needs of students that are coming from all over. And so to me, when we talk about family engagement, it's more than just keeping in contact or having open dialogue and communication. It's really getting at the root of what makes the student who they are and being able to take into account each student's individual story, as well as the collective story of all the students in the classroom and in the building that are being served by the school.
Thank you. So from hearing you right, it's and I appreciate your sense of it's not just about engagement. It's about truly understanding, and that the family is an important part of that student's identity. Mm-hmm. And as you talk, I also begin to think about parents as students' first teacher, right? So thank you. Marco.
Sorry about that. I was just saying that as soon as I saw the question, the first thing that occurred to me was that in my role as a classroom teacher and as a partial inclusion classroom teacher, so I have very few students, every one of my students, especially if I have them over a period of 5 years, which is the way things are set up, it's kind of like an inch wide, mile deep experience. So I'm actually spending so much time really connecting with families that some of the best connecting with community resources. I look to my school to do that, and they do a good job. What I've experienced getting to know parents well, and I've gotten to know the parents of my kids really, really well, is that they struggle with wanting to know that at least one teacher at the school really knows their child, like really knows their child in a profound way, knows their child in an open-minded way, knows their child, and all the kinds of, but they also are still kind of protective of aspects of the family or the family life or the financial situation that they still feel don't need to be part of the conversation. So one of the things that I found works well in terms of connecting with families is I try and get to know them well enough where we can have a comfortable conversation about the things that they would expect to want to talk about. What's going on in school, or, what are you seeing at home? Or, he says he's got 2 summer jobs. Can you tell me what they are? Because we were thinking of asking him to take part in the summer program, et cetera. But then every now and then you do have moments where a parent or a guardian is kind of being upfront about the fact, look, I've been having a really hard time with this because, and then you do, it's not like I automatically feel like I'm some kind of a resource to the parent in terms of helping them deal with whatever problem it is that they're telling me. But I always understand that sometimes just being able to say it to someone, whatever it is that you're thinking about, just being able to say it to someone who's actually not going to trip over themselves immediately to give you a whole lot of suggestions. Sometimes you can get families to the point where they're comfortable discussing a whole lot of things if they feel like it was on their terms. But it's really, really important. It's really important to connect with families. I've been fortunate enough to teach the course a second time since Tia, Jennifer, and I taught it together. And this time, almost to a person, the 23 or 24 participants in the cohort all said that real thoughtfulness and skill developing around school family engagement was a big growth area for them. That was something they wanted to know about. They wanted to read about. We talked about it frequently. I can say more about that later, but that's where I am.
So I'll come back to you on that if you have more to say, for sure. Thank you. Tia.
So I think we always have to acknowledge that parents are like the number one stakeholders within a school community, because as both Marco and Jennifer said, they are the ones that know their children the best. And I think it's the job of the school, the staff of the school, to, in their quest of creating a safe and supportive school community, to really understand the parents, and not just the parents as a person that has a child in your school, but actually know who the parents are, their values, their morals, um, things that make them feel great about being a parent. A lot of times, especially for students that are labeled um, in a space where they have a 504 IEP or additional services or additional counselors, sometimes they can get a bad rep in terms of behavior. And so, unlike the people on this call, on this panel right now, we would know how to speak to parents and engage with them in a way where they feel safe and supported. But can you imagine how many times somebody has called their house? Let's say their child is in Marco's level in high school. And how many times a parent has got a call and said, "Oh, your child is acting up. They're not doing the right thing. They're doing this." And then it causes the parent to feel aggression toward the school, towards the staff, and maybe even sometimes towards the child. And I think if you can break that down, if referencing again what Marco said, he said it so eloquently. It's the parent has to know that I'm a safe person for you to talk to your student about. I'm not judging them. I'm coming without bias. It's just purely here to help your student, and in helping your student and your child, that means helping you and being there for you, because you're going to end up helping me. And I think there needs to be like a cross pollination of language. As a middle school principal, sometimes I can spend up to 2 hours doing like a reset on a student, where I'm pouring in everything I can to make sure that they feel loved, harvested, and supported in school. And they'll stay after school, we'll be at school until 6 o'clock at night. And then they go home, and then they come in the next day with tears in their eyes, or, they don't feel as great about themselves as they felt the day before. And that rebuild is a lot. And I think that's like the re-traumatization of a child, is when every day they have to go through the conundrum of, in school, it's this way. At home, it's this way. If I don't have a home, it's this way. So we have to just keep taking that into consideration. And we're saying parents, but parents can be grandparents. Parents can be your counselor if you live in a group home. Parents can be your DSS social worker. Parents can be your principal. Parents can be your teacher, right? So we have to acknowledge that too. And so I think the question is kind of loaded in terms of asking about a trauma sensitive, I'm just going to say trauma sensitive space or learning community. Um, there's tons of people that need to be connected, because we all play different roles when it comes to the students. And I think that's really important.
Thank you. I want to get back to Marco, some of what you were talking about. And you looked like you were ready to talk. So
I was just snapping my fingers in support of what Tia said. I wasn't asking you to.
okay. I understand. I'm sorry. I have a little bit of a cough going. You talk about that safe person or persons in the school. And that certainly reflects my own experience with my own children. Who is it I can have the real conversation with? And I'm wondering if you have any thoughts around what are things that we can do as educators to support the creation of that type of a connection?
I think constant communication. Like I said, parents don't want to be called every time their student makes a mistake. It's like keeping them informed of every last thing that's going on in schools. I'm a firm advocate of Loom videos. So even though it may sound a little crazy, I feel like when parents can be connected with the students' content, but everyone is at a different age, they learn things in a different way. So I'm a big advocate of something called Loom videos, where teachers or myself or a counselor can give exactly what they're giving to the student in a short snippet video form, like how we did at the beginning of this panel, and keeping that ongoing resource library for families. So at any time, if they want to look up what we're talking about on this particular day, when my child comes home and they're talking about this new money math that they're learning, or they're talking about a new social emotional learning approach that they learned in their second step curriculum, that the parents can see it immediately. And I just think it takes a lot of communication. And I know teachers, they get drained. Educators, we get tired, but it is an act of selflessness, because we're all the parents in this situation. We have to communicate. We have to be in one team in order to see the progression of who we're trying to support, and building those universal languages through constant communication, I think is a way to keep it together.
No, you referenced the high school call home, and my experience has always been, in fact, this was emphasized to me in a situation where I called a parent about her son and he was not following the rules. And when she heard who I was with the school and calling, her statement to me was, "What's the little SOB done now?" I mean, she had been trained, if you will, not trained, but she knew that if someone from school is calling, it's not because her son did well, it's because her son was in trouble. And it was a real epiphany for me, and it really changed how I worked with the parents who I worked with very closely. So I appreciate that. Certainly part of my learning as an educator, if you will. Any other comments on parents and the creation of these safe and close connections?
Jennifer had something. I just wanted to share something about these teachers I worked with who wanted to connect. This most recent time when I taught the course, my co-instructor and I, we decided to add in a mandatory weekly journal component. And to start it off, what I asked everyone to do, each of the 24 people in the class, was, I want you to think about one person in your day-to-day life at school. It could be a student, it could be a parent, it could be a colleague, one person who you feel might be best served by whatever it is you hope to learn here about race, trauma, and equity. And then the first time was basically to just kind of somehow introduce that person, so that part of the weekly journal dialogue would be to kind of go back to this person once a week and kind of share some takeaways from, whatever it was they were doing in the class. And what I found immediately was that a lot of these educators in their journals were actually having ongoing dialogues with parents. One of them, the very first line of her very first journal was, our IEP meeting ended 3 days ago, and I can't stop thinking about it because you were so angry at me, and I felt like I'd really let you down. So long story short, I think the more we practice having these kinds of conversations with anyone in any appropriate setting, the more comfortable we'll be when something is presented to us, either something that's going on in the home that the family thinks we need to know about. In my case, oftentimes it's about sudden loss of family members, sudden tragic loss of family members, or if there's something sensitive that we need to communicate to the school, to the parents, excuse me. As a special educator, every time I have an IEP meeting, I'm required to ask the family, do you think your child is any more susceptible to teasing, harassment, or bullying because of the nature of their disability? And a lot of families kind of want to immediately say no, and so I have to explain to them that it's a pretty opaque thing. It's not like it's not like I'm going to have the child walk around with a T-shirt that says "Don't tease me because I'm a special ed kid." But sometimes in that kind of a conversation, all of a sudden, parents feel like they're being given license to talk about a whole lot of things. And once people have felt like they could talk to you about something and not regret it, doesn't mean that you have to give solutions. I mean, I've created strong bonds with parents because the first couple of times that they called, they just screamed at me. They didn't even know me, but you're another one of those M&F teachers who doesn't give a shit about my kid and all you can, and you just, I'm not going to try and convince such a person. No, that's not true. I'm so-and-so. They got more by just being able to just let it out.
So I just want to remind those participants who are listening that if you have any questions, please post them in the chat. That's where we're getting our questions from. And I have another question I'd like to ask, and this is more teacher focused, if you will. What tools do teachers have to cope with their own stressors and adverse experience?
I heard a really interesting analogy in my LIFT class on Monday. And the example was given, if when you ride a plane and you sit in the emergency exit and they say, okay, in order to help somebody else, you need to pull your mask down first and plug it in and get your oxygen before you can do that for others. And I think that that's what educators need to do. They need to set a time space for, number one, their self-care and allowing themselves grace, because in educational systems, in schools, and in learning communities, it is very fast. And it could be 8 o'clock in the morning when you get there, you blink your eye, it's 3:30, you blink your eye, it's 7, you blink your eye, you're not even home yet, it's 9:30. And that you've just been consumed and no time to think, just to think about your day and unpack your day. And then you're dealing with 500 students that are always on your mind. So I think that self-care, I always like to encourage school leaders to build in points of self-care within the school day. So something that I'm a big advocate for is teachers having additional prep, but prep not to do lesson plans or to work on classroom stuff, but just to connect with themselves. And so we built an enrichment course into our day-to-day schedule that is like a free period just for the staff to have a siesta, as we call it, just a break, which is oftentimes needed. Also, I love the idea about journaling, because some things you want to revisit later. Maybe you don't have the words to do that, and it builds almost like a conundrum in your mind. So write it down and make sure you have space to talk about it later. And also, I think measures of coping with your own stresses is finding your tribe and being able to talk about experiences. I think that's one thing that I loved working with this group right here, is that we have similar experiences in our day to day. And so when we taught the course together, we always took time after or before class just to talk about our day to day, because even though we're doing 3 different roles in a bigger system that's together, technically, it really eases the mind to find your tribe so you can talk about it and someone can actually understand you. So teachers, I encourage educators, find spaces where you can be understood in any way you're letting out your voice, and you need that support.
Thanks, Tia. Marco, Jennifer?
For me, I would suggest depersonalization, because I think it's easy to get so, as Tia said, when you're so wrapped up in the work and you're doing the work with your heart, it can be easy to get kind of just wrapped up in the behavior and the trauma response of your students and your families and everyone around you. And so something that's helped me is to depersonalize and really just become more knowledgeable about how certain experiences can impact learning for students and can impact, family life, family structure. It's much easier said than done. But I think once you take the position that no one ever wakes up with a plan to disrupt someone's peace, right? Some people do, but I think most people, especially when you're talking about young students, they don't wake up to try to figure out how to mess with the adults in their lives. They're literally living in their bodies in the only way they know how. And so it's our job to be mindful and aware of how they as individuals are processing, and even further back, how their lived experience allows them to process, even if the processing that we end up seeing is not always the most productive or positive. And so that's something that's helped me.
So this is my thing that I carry around, and I tell to as many people as should listen. Teachers should do group therapy. Teachers should flat out do group therapy, and schools should provide it. It should be part of it should be part of professional development, not part of the health plan or whatever. Because teachers just don't have enough opportunities to really sit and just talk about their experiences with one another, or even with themselves. When I had students write these journals during this course, my co-instructor and I made a point of not responding to journal entries at all. No comments on journal entries, because we didn't want people to think that they were saying something to us all the time. We didn't want people to think that they needed to do, like the second week, everyone's like, what's the question? I said, there's no more questions. But everyone got really faithful with it, to the point where by the end of the course, I kind of found myself saying to them, you guys are about to finish LIFS 5, which means you finish the sequence, and you'll get a certificate, and you can take it home and frame it and put it on the wall and look at it every now and then. But these journals are like your diploma. And so I don't know if there's anyone out there who can ever help make that happen. I remember one time I went to the American Educational Research Association conference, and I spent the whole time running around talking to every single graduate teacher program I would listen. It's like, you have them do practicum, and then they have to do this weekly seminar with some teacher who just needs to pick up an extra session, and they don't do anything. And this is where you could actually teach teachers as part of their training to look for and make good use of opportunities to just process what they've experienced, and to process it in a place that feels safe. Keep going back to Tia keeps mentioning safe spaces.
Yeah, I agree. I think to me, it comes back to Tia's comment about find your tribe. That group therapy, if we had time, when we have time, and I know when I'm teaching courses, oftentimes teachers in their project groups will comment that we need time to do this reflection in school, at work. There's a hunger for that type of reflection and that type of group thinking. So thank you all. We had one last question that just came in on, what about college? How does this all transfer over to that age group? First off, parents are probably less involved, but, to me, I would take that more of that student-centered piece. Like, what do you feel are the transferable pieces we're talking about here with students who are in college, independent, or becoming independent, and in that educational setting?
I think college is the best time to own who you are. I don't know if anyone else has had this experience, but I've had some students that I've worked with that say, I can't wait to go to college because I won't have to have all this, navigating for me. And sometimes that is such an empowering feeling, especially if the student is coming from a learning space that maybe didn't fit them the best that it could. So I think owning their new positionality in their journey of life, because you have a new position, you have a new position, a new point of power for yourself, where you can navigate more of your classes, you can navigate more of your needs, and it's not so much people talking over and through you, but you are the one being able to make those firm decisions for yourself and setting up your own map, right? And I think that's one of the great things when 12th graders matriculate to college. They can own it. You don't have to say, oh, I have to balance math, science, English, history, and this and that and that. You can say, I want to be a scientist, and that's all I'm going to do. I'm going to find my scientist tribe. We're going to talk about scientist stuff. I'm going to do my scientist support, and that's it. And I think that's such a beautiful thing when that can happen, because then you're able to articulate let's say parents are, active in your life in a different way, you're able to articulate to your parents now everything that you've accomplished and or everything that you're doing, and you can put the pause on them because you're able to say where your allies lie and who is important to you. It's not people talking over you.
Thanks. Others?
I think the college experience is, I agree, it's a huge opportunity. The first thing that comes to mind is the student centered piece of it. I think about, when I was in college, I was in student government, I was in all like the activism groups, like um, those are opportunities to really shape what your needs are as a student based on your own personal lived experience and the gaps that you see where you are. For example, for me, I became really passionate about having professors that share my lived experience. I didn't realize how important that was to me until I got to college and got around students who were really passionate about it, because many of us attended predominantly white schools. And so really like being able to redefine who you are and what your passions are, and to really practice that advocacy about the things that you're passionate about and that matter to you, and really thinking back about the things you didn't get as a child, I think could be even more impactful in that college age as you're defining yourself, figuring out your field and what you want to do in your future. I think it's an awesome opportunity.
I'm reading this question in a particular way, and I'm grateful for the question, but it could play out in a lot of ways. In the two charter schools that I've worked in over the past 8 years, you might see 80% of the graduating seniors knowing which college they're going to go to next year. But then if you start tracking how long they stay, things trail off really quickly. A lot of the students who I know, who I work with, who, are all ready to go for one reason or another by the end of freshman year, sophomore year. And so I guess what I'm saying is that they're still the age that they are, whether they're in college or not. And a lot of our students from the jump, they're not talking about going to college. They want to go right into the trades. So what I try and focus on with my students, especially the older ones, are just what are the kinds of skills that you need that can kind of transcend your content knowledge. So we're constantly talking about more effective ways to ask questions. We're constantly talking about self-advocacy, constantly talking about, especially for the older kids, we spend the whole year in ELA on the notion of a personal narrative. What's the story about yourself that you want to tell the world? And so what I'm hoping is whether or not my scholars either go directly to college or whether they stay and graduate from college, they would have had a set of skills and confidences that would serve them no matter where they go. Yeah, I mean, it's great that kids want to go to college, and the schools do whatever we can to support them. And and with our kids, it's always about, well, it's not just where you want to go, but what kind of scholarship money is available and what are you doing to earn it. But the age that we're talking about is college is one thing that may occupy that age, not the other. And then the last thing I always tell my students, one of the things that they're going to realize when they go to college is that they're going to have so much free time, it might scare the hell out of them. Especially urban charter schools, there are no, I don't know, our kids have no free periods. There's no such thing as a free period. Every single moment of the day is scheduled. Every single moment of the day has you in constant or near constant contact with an adult who probably knows more about you than you want. And then you go to college and you have like giant swaths of the day to yourself. So what are you going to do now to help yourself get ready for that? Because in high school, it's the opposite. We make you study all day, then we, give you 4 hours of homework a night, even though half of you are going to work a job or half of you have to go home and help take care of your younger brothers and sisters. I mean, it's a little bit of it's a culture shock. All of a sudden it's like, damn, like I don't have a class on Tuesdays until 3 p.m. What am I going to do with myself? So.
Well, thank you. I want to thank our speakers this evening. Again, a tremendous amount of insight into the questions we raised. And if I think of those common threads that work through, certainly one of those common threads is the power of community and who we connect with, whether it's finding our tribe or whether it's, finding those connections with colleagues or the passion we have to connect and give students a sense of belonging. That safe and supportive community is just a very powerful piece. So again, I thank you for being here. And